Hi, and welcome everyone to our special event on how to operationalize identified data and protect PII, brought to you by Radiant Digital Ventures in partnership with Anonomatic. My name is Gil Tadmore, and I am the managing principal at Radiant Digital Ventures, and I will be your host today. We are a private equity investment and advisory firm for early stage technology startups. Today, Anonomatic has a very exciting and game-changing solution to share with us. The need for data sharing and collaboration is continuously on the rise, whether solving on-demand tactical needs or establishing pathways to extract business value for long-term strategic initiatives. Anonomatic is carving out new pathways that enable PII-protected data sharing across the data universe, with shorter time to deploy, reduced complexity, all while maintaining high data confidence and integrity. I would like to thank our audience for taking the time out of their day spent with us, and of course to our guest speakers, Matt Fleck and Neil Heller, Anonomatic co-founders. Today's event should last about 30 minutes, including a live Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to participate in the live Q&A, just submit your questions into the chat, and we will address them at the end of the conversation. We have a lot of exciting ground to cover, so let's begin. With that, I'll hand it off to Neil Heller, and later we will also hear from Matt Fleck.
Thanks, Gil, and we're so very happy to do this webinar with you. I'd like to take just a few minutes and introduce Anonomatic and tell you a little bit about what we do and what we'll be talking about today. Our mission as a company is really to make data privacy and PII compliance secure, very simple, and cost-effective. We've created a product called the PII Vault. The PII Vault is an API-based solution that allows our customers to safely use, share, and process sensitive information without ever exposing or revealing PII. This is incredibly important for researchers, data scientists, technologists, marketers, and other different people who need to work with identified information. We'll also talk a little about the opportunities for our customers to operationalize their identified data. Clearly, digital transformation is a data-driven process, and working with data, all data, is incredibly important. And finally, we'll talk about a use case on how our customers have actually implemented our solution and what they specifically did to realize the value with their PII. There are a number of different challenges when working with identified data in digital transformation. We've identified 4 basic areas which we think create a pretty good outline and approach for people in understanding the problem sets. First is with data lakes. Everyone wants to get information and democratize data. The challenge is that data lakes contain both identified information like PII as well as the transactional information. This makes it very hard for people to use information to work with the data lakes because all that information is identified. The information that's identified isn't always monitored, and its usage is not always clear. The next area is with unstructured data. There is an incredible explosion of information, whether it's emails, documents, PDFs, everything out there. The information volumes of data are just growing at an unprecedented rate, and regulatory requirements make it very difficult to work with that unstructured data. Thirdly, data lives in a number of different places. If you're Google or Facebook, you've got all the data you need. Everyone else, we've got to go ahead and bring our data together from disparate sources in order to mine it and bring out the best analytics. This is a real challenge when all that data typically has private or identified information within it. And the final area we'll talk about is that private data is in non-production environments, making it very difficult for developers to actually test and work with their systems where the data is identified. So if you're a developer, what you want to do is actually work with production data in non-production environments where none of that data is actually identified. So when we move to the real challenge and what is it customers want to do is that they need to be able to work with this data. There's a treasure trove of information. The data is everywhere, but you can only work with the data if you can actually safely ensure its privacy. If you can separate the PII from the rest of the data and never risk working with identified data, but yet still have the same value for the analytics, you're going to be ahead of the game, and you've definitely going to bring a lot of value to you and your customers. So when you look at what we're doing with the PII Vault, there's 6 functional areas that we bring forward in terms of capabilities. And these capabilities actually allow our customers to store, anonymize, mask, mine, and redact, share sensitive information with 100% data accuracy, along with full international compliance for GDPR and even things like CCPA and all the other regulations that are coming forward in the United States. If you look at each of these categories, data separation, polyanonymization, disparate data matching, data mining, data redaction, and our final area, PI as a service, these are the core capabilities that you will need to actually effectively use, operationalize, mine, share, all of that PII protected and sensitive information. I'd like to introduce my partner, Matt Fleck. Matt's going to talk a little bit about these capabilities with specific use case examples.
Thank you, Neil. And before we go into the individual use cases, starting off with protecting your data lakes, one commonality amongst all of our use cases and everywhere where people are using PII Vault is a major benefit of the PII Vault is in allowing you to operationalize your identified data. What that really means is we handle and solve the problem of privacy compliance by the simple fact that we allow you to operate on your de-identified data as if it was identified. And the reality of most of these privacy regulations is once you have accurately and completely anonymized or de-identified your data, those compliance obligations no longer exist. So you can reduce the costs overhead ongoing for extended period of times simply by utilizing the vault. So it can pay back your investment many times over very quickly. Let's talk about what happens in the event of a data breach right here. We've all heard about numerous data breaches, many systems, many companies. There's pretty much one a week these days. And what happens is that hackers will quite often go against and try and get into the data lakes and the repositories where all the data is. Why? Because it's just so much easier to get the data from there. When you put your data from your transactional system into your data warehouse or your data lake, the data is flattened out and basically every row is going to have all the information they want, the hackers want. It's all the identified trade line data, whether it be financial data, medical history, what have you, plus it has all the identifying details in it. And what that does for an organization is not only impose a great deal of risk just by doing this, but it also imposes a great deal of overhead of having to protect all that information. And the reality is if you put in the data vault right in the middle and use our polyanonymization technology, then each of your data stores within your warehouses or your lakes can be completely anonymized using our polyanonymization technology and greatly reducing the risk of exposure of any of your data in the event of a data breach. Secondly, if you were looking to make safe your unstructured data, and unstructured data, documents, emails, just like Neil had mentioned, they can quite often, and unbeknownst to you, have personal private information in them. How do you make it safe to use, to combine, to store? Well, the PII Vault can easily allow you to redact the data, the PII that is within those unstructured data elements, the documents, and even re-identify them if needed. So you can take data, anonymize it, store it, and then re-identify it if somebody needs it. Or you can keep it completely redacted in the event that you're going to share it. How does that work? The data source will provide the contents directly to the PII Vault. We'll then remove all the PII from that content, render it completely anonymous, and then return it back to the data processor where it can be stored or processed with complete safety. Now that we have two relatively simple use cases, a more complex one, and where we actually started, is when there were organizations that wanted to combine data for their common benefit. Neil mentioned Google and Facebook, everybody else in the world is going to be competing with them because they do have so much data and it's so much disparate data. So how does everyone else compete? We believe that they're going to be able to compete by being able to share data, again, for their common benefit. You may want to simply share, exchange data for your common good. You may want to make data that you have available to others for sale, or you may want to purchase somebody else's data. In all of those situations, it is far easier to buy, share, or sell your data if it is completely de-identified. But how does that impact its usability? With PII Vault, it doesn't. So let's take an example of a merger and acquisition. You have two companies that, doing their due diligence, need to evaluate the actual uplift of adding the acquisition target's customers to the purchasing company's customers. How much are they going to increase their sales? How many new customers are they going to get? At this stage of a negotiation, neither company wants to share their actual customer list because that's still proprietary information. So the way it would work is that each party, both the acquisition target and the purchasing company, would gather their information fully identified within their own firewall. And before they share any of that information, they would utilize the PII Vault. What the PII Vault does is allows each of those parties to independently share their PII and only the PII into the vault. Now, the PII by itself, when it has no data to identify and it doesn't even know where that data comes from, is much safer than when that PII is together with the data it identifies. So it's automatically safer than when it was before. What the PII Vault will do then is it will generate a multi-value non-identifying identifier, what we call a polyanonymous ID or poly ID. We'll return those to the two parties that have sent the PII in. What that allows the acquisition target to do, and the purchasing company, is to purge the PII from that data set and replace it with the poly ID. These data sets are now completely anonymous. The poly ID, we call it polyanonymous because it has multiple values and it has multiple layers of multiple values. First off, each party that is providing data to the vault, be it the acquisition target or the purchasing company, when they send data in for an individual, they always get different poly ID values. So at this point, sending the same person from each side, still that data cannot be joined. Additionally, because some people might be nervous for what happens if the acquisition target gets breached, and maybe even they're able to breach the PII Vault. Polyanonymous ID, multiple values, the value that the parties get when they deposit their PII into the vault is different than the value that we store. So therefore, there is no database that has the polyanonymous ID value that we return to the acquisition target and the purchasing company, where that data is actually tied to the personal details. So that data is, or that ID is safe. It's even HIPAA compliant. But let's get back to this use case. So we now have the acquisition target and the purchasing company who have independent, fully anonymized data. They can then share it with a third party or whoever is going to do this analytics. And now those different data sets can be merged and analyzed. Almost. The part that's missing, as I mentioned, the polyanonymous ID values are different. So how does that work? In a permission-based solution, the third party can request permission to receive a linking table that will tell them which polyanonymous IDs from the acquisition company and from the purchasing company relate to the same person. So now you have these three completely anonymous data sets. You've got an anonymous data set from the acquisition target, an anonymous list of customers and purchases from the purchasing company, and a completely anonymous table that just links one value to another. And with that sort of information, you can mine these data sets and get all the information you need about your uplift of getting these customers. And none of these parties ever had to risk sharing their personal information of their customer list. As Neil also mentioned, one of the things that we've been asked for a lot is for organizations who want to be able to utilize their production data in non-production environments. There are other parties out there who do something like this that's generally called data masking. But what we do, which is different from them, is we'll actually go into a database and change those values so that from the database administrator and the network security people on up, the data that's in the non-production environment is completely anonymous. How does that work? To start with, a snapshot is taken of the production database. And of course, that's going to be fully identified. Through using a tool like Jenkins or some other automation solution, there's a few steps that happen as this data goes through the PII Vault. The PII Vault will collect all the identifying information from that database. We store it inside the PII Vault, but then we use that to generate pseudonyms, completely anonymous values for the names, for the IDs, for the addresses, for the phone numbers. We make all the data look real, but none of it's real. And then we update this non-production version of the database with those anonymous pseudonyms. That non-production version can then be instantiated and used for training, sales, demonstrations, or for developers. Whatever the need may be, it's now a completely safe environment with no risk of exposure to the PII because none of it is in there. It's really quite useful. The last item, which we're most excited about, is our ability to operate PII as a service. And what that means is we're essentially a centralized, segmented repository for all the PII. So if anyone is developing a new solution, especially whether it be a transactional solution, a mobile solution, or a data warehouse type solution, they can create that without any PII inside that repository, because each system can read, write, update, or delete whatever PII they need directly from the PII Vault. It can be the one and only single repository for all the PII within your organization. How do we actually get implemented? How do you use this? Don't worry, you don't have to send any of your data up into the cloud into Anonomatic's instance or to share any of your data with us or anyone else. We provide our entire solution as a self-contained black box container. What does that mean? It means it can go inside your own infrastructure on premises if you like. It can go into your private cloud. It can go into your public cloud. It also means that it is highly secure. We have multiple layers of security within the vault. Now, most times when there is a breach and a hacker gets into a database, it's because they went in through a side door, a crack in the wall, an open window. Basically, there was another way to get to the data other than through the main access panels. The PII Vault has none of those. We have no windows, we have no reports, we have no analytics. There is absolutely no way that we, as on Anonomatic, look to monetize or utilize your data whatsoever. It stays with you on your premises. We can't get to it, and if we could, we couldn't even read it. Our security is so strong that only the vault is able to process any of the data. The other thing I'd like to point out is that the PII Vault is not just an idea, and we're not coming to you with just a first release. We're actually out on version 2 of our product to get already. The PII Vault started in a very difficult situation. The Los Angeles Unified School District has over 100 different independent healthcare services facilities spread across its campuses to serve its 600,000 plus students. Those healthcare facilities receive a great deal of funding throughout the year from the school district and from others. But nobody anywhere has ever been able to establish a link between specific healthcare services provided to students and their academic performance. If you think about it, it seems relatively straightforward and obvious. If a student is able to attend school because they don't stay home because of asthma problems, or they're not worried about tooth pain from dental issues, they should be able to do better in school, right? But nobody's been able to quantify it until now. Anonomatic has collected 500 million FERPA-protected academic records, including the daily attendance over a number of years from those 600,000 plus students, as well as data from over 300,000 HIPAA-protected medical records, detailed medical records from those independent healthcare service providers. That data has all been anonymized at the source. So each of these healthcare service providers were able to anonymize their data before they shared it with the LA Trust. That anonymous data, combined with the anonymous data from the school district, can be joined at the individual level so that a relationship between the healthcare services provided and their academic performance can be established. What sort of insights can you get from there? Well, when you are compiling data over so many students in so many different years, you can get a question, or you can get an answer to a question like, what happens to a student's attendance after they start getting treated for asthma? And again, nobody before Anonomatic built this solution for them has ever been able to answer that question. So there we go. We hope we got you your curiosity piqued about this, and we'd love to talk to you more about your questions and what we can do for you in your own situation. Deal?
Excellent. Thank you, Neil and Matt. That was a very informative and engaging conversation, really showcasing your product and technology. For the sake of time management, let's move on to the live Q&A. Remember, if you have any questions to either one of our guest experts, please put them in the chat now, and we'll start by reading off some of the questions that I already see in the queue. So the first one is, how does my protected data, my sensitive data, really stay secure when I use PII Vault?
That's great. Obviously, it's a very sensitive issue when we come to an organization and we say, trust us with your personal information. When it is so sensitive and the risks and costs of exposure can be so high. The PII Vault utilizes multiple layers. I think our count is now up to 7 different ways that the data is protected, and all of them are different. The first is the data resides within your own network. So you are ultimately in charge of who gets access to be able to even reach the vault. The second is by simply separating the identified data from the fact data that it identifies, your risk of exposure of any pertinent information is fraction of what it used to be. Because with the polyanonymization, a third item is that there is no common value. If somebody were, again, to breach one system and breach another and try to link the data, there is no value that allows them to do that. The one and only way to combine data is to ask the vault through its API. And of course, we have our protections there. In regards to their being able to breach the PII Vault, we have 3 levels of encryption and protection. The first is the entire database we use is encrypted at rest with an AES 256 industry standard encryption, but we were not done there. Every row is also encrypted with a proprietary patent pending technology we call data sundering. Third, every column value is also encrypted using a 3rd level of encryption we don't really talk about too much, but what it means is that there are 3 different keys that are the combination of values from Anonomatic and from our clients that all have to come together to be able to read, write, or do anything with this data. And that keeps it very, very secure, because neither Anonomatic nor your client nor any hacker could arguably get all of the values that they need.
Thanks, Matt. That's pretty comprehensive, the way you address the different security layers. But the next question actually is more tactical. What do clients actually have to load their data into your cloud? And in fact, where is the PII Vault located?
You know, it's kind of funny because we did start at the very beginning thinking we've got this great idea. We're just going to create our vault in the cloud and everybody can come to us and upload the data. Well, very quickly we realized nobody's going to do that. So what we did is we actually containerized our entire solution into a Docker container. Now, if you're not familiar with Docker, you might be familiar with the term of a virtual machine, and Docker is the latest iteration of that, where you can basically take a single process and you can make it into a virtual machine that can run anywhere. So Docker is exceptionally versatile, and any of your IT people will know exactly how to instantiate and run anything with Docker. For somebody who is going to download and install behind their firewall our Docker container, it's basically about a 10 to 15 minute process. We have a step-by-step download guide. There's a single command to instantiate it inside Docker, and then you paste in your activation key, and basically you're done. So then you get to keep that vault inside your infrastructure. You're not uploading it to us. And then you're in control not only of the processing power behind the vault, but also who has access to it.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to address it, no doubt. I think the next question actually takes it a step further. Now that you have the PII Vault installed, what is the process to actually set it up? And I think probably in the aspect of integration.
Sure. Yeah, I think I already covered the setup of the physical and logical setup of the vault itself. But then, great, you have it. How are you going to use it? The vault operates on or provides its services through a series of APIs or web services. Those APIs and web services are fully documented on our website. Feel free to take a look. And what they require is an industry standard method of authorization, where an activation key and an API key is provided to the authorized accounts that are able to send data into the vault or who are able to ask questions of the vault. So it's, again, relatively, actually very simple process to utilize it. Any developer today who uses modern technology, who makes web services calls, will be able to very quickly and easily implement the services that you need within your own infrastructure.
Great. I see some of the folks are actually very interested in even kicking this off. So the question is, what is the best way to request an evaluation license to conduct a pilot project?
There's a couple of good ways to do that. First off, if you just want to kick the tires, and of course that's the way things work today, is you don't buy something until you try it. So please come and try it. Come to our website, anonomatic.com. In the top right-hand corner, there's a free trial button. You can sign up and you can get a free activation to a cloud instance of the PII Vault, where you can load up to, I think it's 2,000 personal profiles in there. Please just use test data. We don't want any real production data in there, but it's an environment where you can kick the tires and see how it works. Now, if you want to go another step further and actually try it within your own organization, and maybe you want to try it with real data, then what you can do is you can buy or license a development version. And the development version is quite cheap. It's made specifically so that a development environment, or development team can download it, use it within their own environment, reset it as often as they like, and it has room for more than just a couple thousand records if you really want to stress test it. So we've given you all the tools you need to be able to try it out and learn it. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help.
All right. So now I'd like to thank both our guest speakers and everyone in the audience who took the time out of their day to spend with us. And no doubt the recording of this webinar will be available on our website listed over here, rdv.studio. And with that, I'd like to make sure everyone has a great afternoon or evening, and thank you and goodbye.